He walked into the shelter expecting silence, but instead, a tiny German Shepherd puppy began to cry. Their eyes met, and in that instant, a forgotten bond was reignited. But what should have been a reunion of joy soon turned into heartbreak, as fate revealed a painful truth that no one saw coming. If you're an animal lover, hit subscribe for more stories like this. It's completely free, and it inspires us to keep telling the ones that truly matter. The shelter smelled of damp concrete, disinfectant, and the faint sorrow that clung to every barking cage. Rain hammered the tin roof, its rhythm echoing through the long, narrow corridors lined with kennels. Inside, dozens of dogs stirred restlessly, some barking for attention, others lying silently with eyes too tired to hope. Daniel pulled his jacket tighter around himself as he walked slowly down the hallway. He wasn't supposed to be here. At least, that's what he had been telling himself for weeks. He had avoided the shelter since the day his world collapsed, since the day he lost Max. Max wasn't just a dog. He was Daniel's partner, a German Shepherd trained in search and rescue, his companion through disasters both on the job and in life. They had been inseparable for 6 years until the accident, the one Daniel couldn't stop replaying in his head. A collapsed building, dust choking the air, Max digging furiously to reach survivors. And then, the sudden crash of concrete. Daniel had pulled 2 people out alive, but Max never came back to him. The grief had been unbearable. Daniel swore he'd never step foot inside a shelter again, never look into another pair of brown eyes begging for love. But life has a way of testing promises. His friend, a volunteer at the shelter, had begged him to visit. "Just come by, Daniel. There's one puppy I need you to see," she had said. He resisted at first, but here he was now, heart heavy, steps slow, haunted by memories. As he passed kennel after kennel, dogs pressed their noses to the bars, tails wagging or voices rising in desperate pleas. But Daniel kept his eyes down. He couldn't bear to meet their gaze, not when he knew he couldn't handle that connection again. Then, halfway down the row, he heard it, a sound unlike the others. Not barking, not whining, but a sharp, broken cry. It pierced through the noise of the shelter, high-pitched and desperate, like a sob. Daniel froze. Slowly, almost against his will, he looked up. In the corner kennel sat a German Shepherd puppy, no more than a few months old. His fur was damp from the rain leaking through a crack in the roof, his ears too big for his head, his paws oversized and clumsy. But it wasn't his appearance that struck Daniel, it was his eyes. Wide, shining, trembling, and locked directly on him. The puppy cried again, a sound so raw it seemed to carry a story. He stood, pressing his tiny body against the bars, and his tail wagged weakly as if he recognized the man standing there. Daniel blinked, taken aback. "No, it can't be," he whispered under his breath. The shelter worker, a kind woman named Claire, walked up behind him. "That's the one I wanted you to see," she said softly. "He doesn't react like this to anyone else." Daniel shook his head, his throat tight. He looked at me like he knows me. The puppy cried again, louder this time, his nose pushing desperately through the cold metal bars. His whole body trembled as he let out small whimpers between his cries, never taking his eyes off Daniel. Something in Daniel cracked open. For the first time in months, he felt his chest burn with something more than grief. It was familiarity, recognition, as if the spirit of Max, his lost partner, was somehow alive in this trembling little pup. He knelt down, his hand trembling as he reached toward the bars. The puppy pressed against his fingers instantly, licking them frantically as if afraid he might vanish. Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. The connection was undeniable. The way the pup responded, it was as if he had been waiting just for him. Claire's voice softened, almost apologetic. "He was found alone in the rain a few weeks ago. Malnourished, terrified. Nobody came for him. But when you walked in, Daniel, I've never seen him react this way." Daniel swallowed hard, his heart warring with his mind. He wasn't ready. He couldn't love another dog, could he? The pain of losing Max was still raw, a wound that never healed. And yet, the sound of this puppy's cries cut straight through every wall he had built. He whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "Why does it feel like you know me?" The puppy yelped again, pawing at the bars. And in that moment, Daniel knew he couldn't just walk away. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this reunion would not be the miracle it seemed. Because sometimes fate brings two souls together not just to heal, but to test how much heartbreak one heart can endure. The moment stretched in the shelter like a fragile thread, ready to snap. The man, David, stood frozen, his breath caught in his chest, while the German Shepherd puppy pressed desperately against the kennel door, crying as though his heart had finally recognized the missing piece of his world. The volunteers and workers whispered among themselves, confusion etched on their faces. To them, this was just another abandoned puppy who rarely reacted to anyone. But now, in the presence of David, his behavior was impossible to ignore. "Sir, do you know this dog?" one of the workers asked softly, sensing the tension. David's throat tightened. His mind spun, searching for an explanation, for clarity, but all he felt was the raw sting of memory. The puppy's eyes, those wide, trembling eyes, looked so familiar. They weren't just pleading for comfort. They were remembering. David knelt slowly, his hands trembling as he pressed them against the bars. The puppy's paws instantly met his fingers, nails scraping, body quivering with hope. A strangled whimper escaped the little one's throat. I, I don't understand," David whispered, his voice breaking. "I've never seen him before." And yet it felt like he had. The staff unlocked the kennel to allow a closer interaction. The gate swung open with a creak, and before David could even prepare himself, the puppy lunged forward, not in fear, not in aggression, but in desperate recognition. He crashed into David's chest, burying his wet nose into the man's shirt, crying with such intensity that even the hardened shelter workers felt their eyes sting. David wrapped his arms around the trembling body. The puppy smelled faintly of disinfectant and something older, something that clung to fur and memory. His ribs jutted out from hunger, his ears still slightly floppy with youth. And yet, his heart beat wildly against David's chest as though it had finally found its home. "Hey, it's okay," David murmured, running a shaky hand along the pup's back. "It's okay, boy. You're safe now." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure why he felt this depth of connection. He couldn't explain why his chest ached so much just holding him. One of the volunteers, a woman with tired eyes but a gentle smile, approached slowly. "This little one came to us 2 months ago," she explained. "We found him tied to a post outside in the freezing rain. No note, no collar, just left there. He hasn't connected with anyone since. He barely ate, barely lifted his head. We thought." She trailed off, swallowing hard. "We thought he might not make it." Until now. David looked down at the puppy, whose eyes never once left his face, as if afraid he would disappear. "What are you trying to tell me, huh?" David whispered, brushing his thumb across the pup's cheek. The puppy licked his hand frantically, whining, tail beating with desperate relief. But as beautiful as the moment was, there was something heavier lingering in David's chest. A shadow. Because while the dog clung to him with every ounce of recognition, David's memories refused to align. He searched his past, childhood, college, work trips, neighbors' dogs, but nothing explained this overwhelming bond. Unless a thought flickered, a place he had tried not to think about in months. The day he lost someone dear. The night filled with red and blue lights, sirens echoing, and the suffocating grip of helplessness. David shut his eyes tightly. "No," he muttered under his breath. "It can't be." The puppy whimpered louder, pawing at his chest as if to say, "Yes, it can." The shelter worker spoke again, her voice hesitant. "Sir, if you want, you can take him out to the yard. Spend some time. See if you two really belong." David nodded, unable to speak. He carried the puppy gently outside, the little body pressed against him like he was carrying the weight of a secret. In the yard, the grass crunched under his boots. The puppy finally wriggled free, only to circle back immediately, pressing himself against David's leg. He wouldn't leave his side, not even for a second. David crouched low, brushing his fingers through the soft, patchy fur. The dog wagged his tail, but his eyes held grief, recognition, and something else David couldn't name. "Why do I feel like I already lost you once?" David whispered. The puppy barked suddenly, One sharp cry that sounded less like excitement and more like an answer. David's heart twisted. Because deep down, in places he didn't want to go, he already feared the truth. Something sad had tied them together before this reunion. And whatever it was about to surface. The shelter was quiet that morning, except for the low murmur of volunteers cleaning kennels and the occasional bark echoing through the halls. Outside, gray clouds hung heavy, promising rain, but inside, Daniel sat cross-legged on the concrete floor of Max's run. The puppy had curled against him the moment the door clicked open, pressing his little body into Daniel's chest like he was afraid Daniel might vanish if he let go. Every few minutes, Max would lift his head, nose trembling as he pressed it against Daniel's neck, almost as if he was making sure this wasn't a dream. Daniel couldn't stop his hands from shaking as he stroked the dog's fur. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, his voice catching. "I looked everywhere, and all this time, you were here." Max whined softly and licked his chin. The sound echoed through Daniel's chest in a way words never could. It was forgiveness, love, and recognition all at once. A volunteer leaned against the doorway, watching the reunion with misty eyes. "He hasn't warmed up to anyone here. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't play. Just cried at night. But the moment he saw you," she shook her head in amazement. Daniel swallowed hard, guilt washing over him. He thought of that day weeks ago, the storm, the flash flood, the way Max had slipped from his grasp in the chaos. Daniel had searched for hours in the pounding rain until exhaustion made him collapse. For days, he returned to the riverbanks, calling Max's name, clinging to hope. But nothing. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, here was his pup, rescued by strangers, locked behind bars, crying himself to sleep. Daniel pressed his forehead to Max's. "I should have protected you." Max whimpered again, pawing gently at Daniel's shirt. But as the joy of reunion spread through Daniel, so did a new kind of ache. He could feel it in the room, heavy and unspoken, the hesitation of the shelter staff, the quiet pity in the volunteers' eyes. Something wasn't right. "Is he okay?" Daniel asked, his hand still resting on Max's small frame. "Has the vet cleared him?" The volunteer's smile faltered. She hesitated, then looked toward the office at the end of the hall. "The manager will want to explain." Daniel's heart lurched. He pulled Max closer as if bracing against the words he hadn't yet heard. Minutes later, the shelter director entered, holding a thin folder. She crouched down beside Daniel and the puppy, her voice calm but serious. "We're glad you're here. Max has clearly been waiting for you." She paused, glancing at the folder. "But there's something you need to know." Daniel's throat tightened. "Tell me." The director laid the folder down gently. Inside were x-rays and vet notes. She explained in careful words. Max had been found weak, shivering, and badly malnourished after the flood. He was recovering, yes, but there were complications. A lingering respiratory issue. Damage to one of his hind legs. Scars that spoke of nights spent cold and alone. "He's strong," the director assured, "but he may never be the same. He'll need special care, maybe for life." Some people, they hesitate when they hear that. Daniel's jaw clenched. "I don't care what it takes. He's mine. He's family." Max wagged his tail weakly at the sound of Daniel's fierce tone, his eyes shining with trust. The director studied Daniel for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, let's start the paperwork. But I'll be honest with you, there's another detail. Something that makes this even more urgent." Daniel's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" She lowered her voice. Max had a hold placed on him. Another family was interested, and they're scheduled to return this weekend. They don't know about you yet. The words struck Daniel like a physical blow. The thought of Max being taken away, after everything, after their bond and their reunion, it felt unbearable. "No," Daniel said immediately, his voice breaking. "He recognized me. You saw it. He remembers me. He's my dog." Max, sensing his distress, whined and pressed closer, his small paw hooking into Daniel's sleeve like he refused to let go. The director's expression softened. "That's why I'm telling you now. You'll need to prove ownership, and it won't be easy without records. But if you're serious, if you're ready to fight for him, then you need to start today." Daniel looked down at the puppy in his arms, the German shepherd who had once chased butterflies in his yard, who had slept curled against his side when nightmares kept him awake, who had vanished in the storm and now, against all odds, returned. Max gazed back up at him, eyes wide and trusting, as if to say, "Don't leave me again." Daniel nodded, his chest tight with determination. "I won't. I'll never let you go again, no matter what it takes." But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. Something sad still waited in the shadows, something that could either tear them apart or prove once and for all that love was stronger than circumstance. And as the first drops of rain tapped against the shelter windows, Daniel held Max close, silently vowing that nothing, not storms, not distance, not even fate, would take his puppy away again. The week after the adoption fell through was the hardest one yet. Daniel carried himself through his days like a man on autopilot, his thoughts snagging on every sound that reminded him of Max. The scratch of nails on the sidewalk, the excited bark of a neighbor's dog, even the squeak of a toy in the park. He couldn't escape it. Everywhere he turned, Max seemed to linger like a shadow. One evening, unable to stand the silence of his home, Daniel drove back to the shelter. He told himself it was to donate food, but in truth, he just wanted to see Max. He needed to. When he walked into the shelter, the smell of disinfectant and damp fur wrapped around him. The place was busier than usual, volunteers moving cages, children pointing at kittens, a woman filling out adoption forms. And then, over the commotion, Daniel heard it. A cry. Not just any cry. The sharp, keening whimper of a German shepherd puppy who had recognized him. Daniel's chest tightened. He turned and saw Max, pressed against the bars of his kennel, his tail wagging furiously, his paws scraping at the metal as if he could claw his way to freedom. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the noise of the shelter dissolved. It was just the two of them, tethered by something that neither rejection nor distance could sever. "Hey, buddy," Daniel whispered, crouching down. Max licked his fingers through the bars, whining, trembling with urgency. Daniel's throat ached. A volunteer passing by shook her head softly. "He's been like that all day? Restless. Wouldn't settle. Now I see why." Daniel pressed his forehead against the bars. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean to hurt you." For a long while, he just sat there with Max, letting the puppy's warm breath on his hand be the balm for the emptiness he carried. But then, just as Daniel allowed himself the fragile hope of maybe, just maybe, trying again, the shelter director appeared. Her expression was troubled. "Daniel, can I talk to you privately?" Reluctantly, he pulled himself away from Max, who yelped in protest, pawing harder at the bars. Daniel's chest twisted. Inside the small office, the director closed the door and sighed. "I need to be honest with you. Max isn't doing well." Daniel's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "He's been showing signs of stress. Separation anxiety, loss of appetite, pacing the kennel until his paws bleed. We had our vet examine him this morning. He's physically okay for now, but emotionally, he's deteriorating." Daniel gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles white. "Because of me?" The director hesitated, then nodded. "He bonded to you very quickly, more than we expected. When the adoption didn't work out, it crushed him. Dogs like Max, they don't understand the logistics. All they know is you left." Daniel's chest felt like it was caving in. He remembered the way Max had cried when he recognized him, the desperation in his eyes. This wasn't just a puppy missing a friend. This was a soul unraveling. The director continued quietly. "We'll keep doing everything we can, but sometimes dogs in his condition shut down completely. They give up." The words landed like stones in Daniel's heart. Give up. Two simple words that carried the weight of an ending. When he left the office, Max was still there, waiting, eyes fixed on the door. The puppy whimpered as Daniel approached, his tail wagging again despite the exhaustion in his body. Daniel dropped to his knees. "I don't know what to do, buddy," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I want to help you, but I don't know if I can give you what you need. And if I fail you again." Max pressed his nose through the bars, whimpering harder, as if pleading. Daniel felt the sting of tears blur his vision. That night, back in his empty house, Daniel couldn't sleep. Max's cries echoed in his ears. The memory of the shelter director's words, "Give up," gnawed at him. His own reflection in the bathroom mirror looked foreign, hollow-eyed, haunted, guilty. He poured himself a glass of water, but his hands shook so badly he had to set it down. He leaned on the counter, breathing hard. The silence pressed in, suffocating. And then, as if pulled by an invisible thread, he whispered out loud, "I can't let him go." The admission broke something inside him. He slid down the wall, covering his face with trembling hands, and for the first time in years, he sobbed. Not the quiet, restrained tears he'd allowed himself before, but the gut-wrenching, body-shaking kind that tore loose everything he had buried. It wasn't just about Max. It was about every loss he had carried, every wall he had built, every fear that had kept him from reaching out. Max had cracked it open, and now there was no way to put it back. By dawn, Daniel knew one thing for certain. If he didn't act soon, he might lose Max forever. And losing him would mean losing the one fragile thread still tethering Daniel to hope. But fate, as it often does, had another twist waiting. Something sad. Something that would test them both in ways Daniel never imagined. Daniel sat on the floor of the shelter's visiting room, his back against the wall, knees pulled close, and his hands trembling slightly. Max lay just a few feet away, his body curled tightly into itself as if trying to disappear. Every so often, the puppy's eyes flicked toward Daniel, wide and wet, then quickly darted away. The distance between them wasn't more than a few feet, but emotionally, it felt like miles. Daniel's heart ached. He could still see the day Max was taken, his sister's tearful face, the way the little German shepherd had pressed against the car door window as the shelter van drove off, crying with confusion. Daniel had promised he would come back. He had come back. But in those lost months, Max had changed. Now, the puppy's cries weren't ones of excitement. They were cries of recognition mixed with hurt. As if Max remembered Daniel, but also remembered the day he was abandoned. "Hey, buddy," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm here now. I didn't forget you." Max whined, then buried his face into his paws. His whole body trembled. The shelter worker standing by the door leaned in quietly. "He's been like this since he got here. Skittish. Eats little. Won't let anyone close. But you, he reacted differently to you." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. He wanted so badly to rush forward, to scoop Max into his arms, but he knew it would only push the pup further away. So instead, he stayed still. He let silence fill the space. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Daniel spoke softly every so often, telling Max stories, recounting memories, promising him things would be different. His voice was low, steady, almost like a lullaby. Finally, Max shifted. Slowly, cautiously, he lifted his head. His eyes met Daniel's. For a brief second, Daniel saw something. Familiarity, longing, but it was quickly replaced by hesitation. Max took a single step closer, then stopped, whining. Daniel didn't move. His hands remained flat on the floor, palms up. His throat tightened as tears pooled in his eyes. "It's okay," he whispered again. "I'll wait as long as you need." The puppy inched forward, then stopped, then moved again. The room seemed to shrink around them, filled only with the sound of Max's hesitant paws tapping against the linoleum. Finally, Max stopped just within reach. His nose twitched. He sniffed Daniel's fingers, then flinched back as if afraid of betrayal. Daniel's heart shattered. This was no longer the playful, fearless pup who once jumped into his arms. This was a dog who had learned the world could hurt him. "I'm sorry," Daniel said softly, his tears falling freely now. "I should have fought harder for you. I should have protected you." Max whimpered, the sound sharp and heartbreaking. He pressed his nose into Daniel's palm for only a second before pulling away again. It was a flicker of trust, fragile and uncertain. The worker's voice was quiet. "He remembers you. That's rare. But it's going to take time. Maybe more time than you expect." Daniel nodded. He knew. Healing wasn't instant. Wounds this deep needed patience, consistency, love without conditions. When visiting hours ended, Max retreated back to his corner. He didn't follow Daniel to the door. He didn't wag his tail. He simply lay there, eyes watching, ears drooping, as if silently begging Daniel not to leave again. "I'll be back tomorrow," Daniel promised, his hand pressed against the glass as the staff let him out. "Every day? Until you believe me." The door clicked shut behind him, but the sound of Max's soft cry followed Daniel into the hallway, haunting him. Outside, the sun was setting, the sky painted in streaks of orange and pink. But to Daniel, it felt dim. His chest was heavy, his legs weak. The reunion he had dreamed of had happened, but not the way he imagined. Instead of joyful leaps and licks, there was distance, fear, and sadness. Still, there was also hope. Max had recognized him. Max had taken a step closer. And Daniel would not give up. As he walked to his car, Daniel whispered to himself the vow he had once made to a small puppy in his arms. No matter how long it takes, you'll never be alone again. The night after the emergency at the shelter felt impossibly long for Daniel. He sat on the edge of his bed, the glow of the small lamp casting soft shadows across the room. Beside him, Max rested quietly, his head on Daniel's lap. The German shepherd's big brown eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but there was a calmness in them that Daniel hadn't seen in months. Daniel stroked Max's fur, his fingers brushing through the thick coat that once carried the scent of their long hikes and quiet mornings together. His chest tightened as he whispered, "I'm here, boy. I'll always be here." Max's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, and with a deep sigh, he pressed his muzzle deeper into Daniel's lap. It was as though he understood that these moments were fragile, finite, something precious they needed to hold on to. The shelter staff had been honest earlier that day. Max's health was failing faster than anyone expected. His body was tired, his heart weaker than it should have been for his age. And though Daniel wanted to fight against it, wanted to beg for more time, he knew deep down that the kindest thing was to be there with Max for whatever time remained. The next morning, Daniel woke early. The air outside was crisp, touched by the cool bite of early autumn. He made Max's favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs mixed with bits of chicken. Max ate slowly, savoring each bite as Daniel smiled through a blur of tears. Afterward, Daniel clipped on Max's leash and opened the front door. "One last adventure, buddy," he whispered. They walked together through the quiet neighborhood streets, then further, to the park where Max had first learned to chase sticks as a puppy. The trees swayed in the morning breeze, golden leaves scattering around them like nature's gentle farewell. Children were playing in the distance, their laughter ringing through the cool air. A little boy ran up to Max, asking if he could pet him. Daniel nodded, and the boy knelt down, scratching behind Max's ears. Max's tail wagged weakly, but it wagged, still carrying that spark of joy he had always given so freely. Daniel swallowed hard. He knew this was the kind of moment Max had lived for, spreading love, reminding people that even the gentlest souls could leave the deepest marks. Later that day, Daniel brought Max back to the shelter, not for adoption, but because that was where Max had found him again. He wanted Max's last memories to be of the place where his heart had been pulled back together. The staff welcomed them quietly, tears already forming in their eyes. They led Daniel and Max to a quiet room, softly lit, with a blanket laid out on the floor. Daniel knelt beside Max, holding him close, his voice steady even as his hands shook. "You found me once, when I thought I had nothing left. You reminded me that love doesn't end, it just changes. You saved me, Max. I hope I saved you too." Max's breathing was shallow, but he gazed up at Daniel with unwavering trust. His tail gave one last gentle thump against the blanket. Then, with Daniel's arms around him and his name whispered like a prayer, Max closed his eyes. The silence that followed was unbearable. Daniel pressed his forehead against Max's and stayed there, holding on, even as tears streamed freely down his face. In the days that followed, Daniel felt hollow. He returned home to the quiet space that now felt unbearably empty. The absence of Max's paused steps, his soft sighs, his unshakable presence, it cut deeper than he could explain. But as the grief washed over him, so did the memories. The way Max had recognized him at the shelter. The way he had fought for their bond, even when Daniel wasn't ready. The way he had reminded Daniel that broken things could heal. And then one afternoon, Daniel returned to the shelter again, not to grieve, but to give back. He found himself walking through the same rows of kennels, meeting eyes with dogs who longed for someone to see them the way Max had once seen him. There was a small puppy in the back, trembling, too afraid to even step forward. Daniel knelt down, extending his hand through the bars. The puppy hesitated, then pressed his nose gently into Daniel's palm. For the first time since losing Max, Daniel smiled without forcing it. "You're scared, huh?" he whispered softly. "I know the feeling. But you're not alone anymore." Weeks later, Daniel signed the adoption papers. The little puppy came home with him, unsure and quiet, but slowly learning what it meant to be safe. Daniel named him Hope. At night, Hope would curl up beside Daniel's bed, just as Max once had. And every time Daniel reached down to stroke his fur, he felt the same steady comfort, the same reminder that love, once planted, never truly dies. Max was gone, but his legacy remained. Not in the silence he left behind, but in the life he had given back to Daniel. A life filled with love, healing, and the courage to begin again. And though the shelter's walls no longer echoed with Max's cries of recognition, they now carried something else, a story passed between staff, volunteers, and visitors. The story of a German Shepherd puppy who once cried when he recognized his man, and who, even in sadness, left behind something unbreakable. A story that would be told again and again. The story of Max.